The wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying with it the scent of smoke and dust. The alien caravan moved quickly through the broken path, a group of figures wrapped in cloaks of silver and steel. Among them was a young girl, smaller than the rest, her steps unsteady, her breathing heavy. She stumbled often, and each time she fell. The others looked back with annoyance, not concern. Her family whispered to each other in sharp tones, their words filled with shame. "She is too weak," one muttered, "a burden to us all." The girl tried to rise, her knees scraped, her arms trembling, her eyes pleading for patience, but patience had long run out. At last her father stopped, his tall figure casting a long shadow across her fragile form. He looked down at her with cold eyes, his voice like a blade. "You slow us down, you bring us danger, you are no daughter of mine." The others nodded, their faces stern, their steps restless, eager to leave her behind. "Please," she whispered, though her voice was too soft, too broken to move there. "Hearts," she reached out, but her father turned his back, his cloak swirling as he marched forward. Her mother did not meet her eyes, her siblings sneered, and within moments they were gone. The sound of their footsteps faded into the storm. Leaving only silence, the girl sat there in the dust, her face streaked with tears, her chest heavy with the weight of rejection. Her heart pounded, her breath came quick. She called out again, but no answer came. She was alone, abandoned by those who had sworn to protect her. The shadows of the ruined city stretched long, and fear crept into her bones. Hours passed, and the light of the twin suns began to fade. The girl tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she sank back to the ground. Hunger clawed at her stomach, thirst dried her throat. She pulled her knees to her chest, whispering words of comfort to herself. But no comfort came, only the echo of her father's cruel voice. Just as the darkness deepened, another sound cut through the silence. Heavy boots crunching against the stone, slow and steady. The girl's ears twitched, her body stiffened, fear flashing in her eyes. She pushed herself back against a wall, trying to make herself small, unseen. Out of the shadows came a figure, tall and broad, wearing armor scarred by battles past. It was a human, his face partly hidden beneath a worn helmet, his eyes scanning the ruins with sharp focus. He stopped when he saw her, his brow furrowing, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence between them heavy and tense. The girl's heart raced. She knew humans were enemies, dangerous. Her family had told her countless tales of human cruelty. She expected him to turn away, or worse, to end her life where she sat. But instead, he stepped closer. His movements slow, careful. He lowered his weapon, his voice calm though she could not understand his words. "You're not safe here," he said softly. The tone carried meaning even without translation. The girl shook her head, pressing herself harder against the wall. Her eyes glistened with both fear and shame. The human crouched down, bringing himself to her level. He studied her face, her trembling hands, her silver eyes filled with despair. Something in his expression shifted, the hard lines softening. He reached into his pack and pulled out a flask of water. He set it gently on the ground between them, pushing it toward her. The girl's eyes widened, her body tense. For several heartbeats she did not move. Then slowly she reached out, her fingers trembling as they closed around the flask. She drank, the cool water soothing her dry throat. Her chest rose and fell with relief, her eyes glancing back at him. In confusion, why would a human help her when her own family had cast her aside? The human said nothing, only watched her with calm eyes. When she finished, she set the flask down, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The ruins groaned as the wind pushed through broken walls. The human stood again, scanning the shadows for danger. Then he looked down at her once more, his hand extended. The girl stared at it, her mind torn. Her people had abandoned her, yet here stood an enemy offering her a chance. Her breath shook as she hesitated. At last, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. The human pulled her gently to her feet, his grip steady, not harsh. The storm howled around them, but for the first time, she did not feel completely alone. The girl glanced back once at the path her family had taken, now empty, then forward at the stranger who had given her water, and now, perhaps, a second chance. The human guided the alien girl through the ruins, his step steady, hers stumbling and weak. The night air was cold, carrying the sound of distant winds and the crackle of collapsing stone. Her small frame shivered under the weight of exhaustion. But she kept walking, her hand still in his, though her grip was faint. Every few steps she looked at him from the corner of her eyes, confusion mixed with suspicion. She had been raised to believe humans were cruel destroyers, unworthy of trust. Yet this one had offered her water, lifted her from the ground, and now walked beside her without a single word of insult. Her heart raced with questions, but her pride kept her silent. She pulled her hand away at last, clutching her cloak tightly, muttering something in her own language. The human glanced at her but did not press, his expression calm, as if he expected nothing from her. They reached a small shelter hidden among the ruins, a crumbled house with half its roof still intact. Inside was a dim fire, flickering against broken walls, and a pile of supplies neatly arranged. The human motioned for her to sit, his voice soft. Rest. She frowned, not knowing the word. But his gesture was clear enough. Still, she hesitated, her pride keeping her on her feet until her legs gave out, and she sank down with a frustrated hiss. The human knelt by the fire, opening a small pack. Pulling out food, he broke a piece of ration and held it toward her. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion burning again. She had been abandoned by her family. Why should she accept help from an enemy? She crossed her arms, shaking her head. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The human only shrugged and ate a piece himself, then placed the rest near her. Minutes passed, her stomach growled, and at last she snatched the food, chewing quickly while avoiding his gaze. The human said nothing, his eyes on the fire, his silence both strange and unsettling. She expected commands, expected mockery, but none came. He simply sat there, calm and steady, as if he had no desire to break her spirit. The alien girl pulled the blanket he offered tightly around her shoulders, refusing to admit she was grateful. Her pride was a wall, but cracks were beginning to form. Later, as the fire burned low, she studied him carefully. His armor was scratched, his face marked with faint scars, his hands rough. He was not like her people, who had left her to die without a second thought. This human seemed carved from stone, steady, unmoving, but not cruel. Her heart whispered questions she dared not ask. At last she muttered in her language, her voice low. The words spilled from her lips in bitterness, sharp and trembling, though he could not understand. The human listened, his eyes fixed on her face. She pointed at herself, at her chest, then shook her head fiercely. Her tone carried the truth. She called herself useless, broken, a burden. Her hands clenched into fists as she spoke, her voice cracking with anger. The human waited until she fell silent, then reached for a piece of cloth and tied it around her wrist. He tapped it lightly, then spoke a single word, slow and clear. Strong. She blinked, confusion flashing in her eyes. She shook her head quickly, snapping back words in her own tongue. But he repeated it again, steady and calm. Strong. Chest tightened, her breath quickened. No one had ever spoken that word to her without laughter, without mockery. She looked away, muttering to herself, trying to bury the strange warmth rising in her chest, but the word echoed in her ears, louder than her father's scorn. The human lay down near the fire, closing his eyes, his weapon at his side. The girl remained awake, staring into the flames, the blanket wrapped tightly around her small frame. Her mind spun with confusion, torn between mistrust and something new. Why had he not left her? Why had he not mocked her like her family? She whispered the word softly to herself, testing its weight. Strong. Her throat tightened. tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back. She clenched her fists, as if holding on to the fragile spark that word had lit inside her. The night stretched on, but she no longer felt as broken as before. For the first time since her family had walked away, she felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone worth saving. The next morning, pale light broke through the cracks in the ruined shelter. The human was already awake, crouched near the fire, sharpening a knife with calm, steady strokes. The alien girl stirred, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her silver eyes blinking against the dawn. For a moment she forgot where she was, then memory returned. Sharp and heavy, her family was gone, but the human remained. She sat up slowly, her body stiff, her pride holding her upright, though weakness weighed her down. The human looked at her once, then pointed to the ground outside the shelter. "Come," he said simply, his tone not harsh, only firm. She frowned, muttering under her breath. But curiosity pulled her to her feet. Her steps were shaky, but she followed him into the open air. The ruins stretched far, broken walls and fallen towers scattered like bones across the land. The human stopped in a small clearing, then placed a staff on the ground. He picked up another for himself and held it out. Showing her with a gesture, she tilted her head, suspicion burning in her eyes. But when he did not lower the weapon toward her, she hesitated. Finally, she snatched the staff, holding it clumsily, her stance awkward. The human raised his own staff, showing her the motion. Feet apart, knees bent, arms steady. He repeated it slowly, giving her time to follow. Her first attempt was clumsy, the staff slipping in her grip, her balance failing as she stumbled forward. Heat rose in her cheeks, shame burning like fire. She threw the staff down with a hiss, but the human only picked it up and placed it back in her hands. His voice calm. Again, she glared at him, her pride flaring, but his steady gaze held. No mockery. Her family had always laughed when she failed, but this human gave no laughter, no scorn, only silence, patience, and expectation. Her lips tightened, and she tried again, her arms trembling with the effort. The staff wobbled, but this time she stayed standing. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher. Her breath came ragged, sweat dampening her hair, her arms aching. Again and again she tried, stumbling, falling, rising. Every time she dropped the staff, he handed it back, repeating the same word, strong. At first she spat the word back at him in anger, shaking her head, but the more he said it, the deeper it cut into her heart. The word began to feel less like a lie and more like a seed, buried deep, waiting to grow. By midday, her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the ground. Panting, the human crouched beside her, handing her water. She took it without hesitation this time, drinking deeply, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. When she looked up, she caught his faint smile, not mockery, but approval. Her heart fluttered with confusion, and she turned her face away, quickly, hiding the warmth in her cheeks. The training did not end with weapons. That evening, he showed her how to build a fire from scraps of wood, how to stack stones so they would not collapse, how to listen to the wind for danger. Her hands fumbled often, her frustration sharp, but the human corrected her with calm gestures, never cruel. By the time the fire burned steady, she stared at it in quiet wonder. She had never made anything with her own hands, never felt the spark of pride in her chest. The human sat nearby, his voice low, speaking words she could not fully understand, but his tone carried meaning. He pointed at the fire, then at her, then spoke the word again, strong. Her lips trembled as she repeated it, clumsy and soft, strong. That night she lay under the broken roof, her eyes fixed on the stars peeking through the cracks. Her body ached, but it was not the ache of weakness. It was the ache of effort, of trying. She whispered the word again, quiet but certain, strong. For the first time since her family had abandoned her, she felt the faint glow of hope. It was small, fragile, but it burned brighter than the scorn that had haunted her. The human's patience, his calm strength, had begun to show her a truth she had never dared to believe. She was not a burden, not broken. She could learn. She could change. She could fight. And as sleep pulled her into dreams, the fire of survival burned quietly in her heart, a spark that would one day become a flame. The days passed slowly, marked by endless practice, steady footsteps, and the soft crackle of fire at night. The alien girl was no longer the silent shadow who only clung to her shame. Her eyes began to shine brighter, her hands steadier, her steps less weak. Though her body still trembled with effort, there was a fire in her now that had not been there before. One morning, the human tossed her a wooden staff without a word. She caught it easily this time. No stumble, no hesitation. Her stance was firm, her grip strong, and when she swung, the sound cracked sharply against his staff. The human gave a faint nod, his approval silent but clear. Her lips curled slightly at the corners, not a full smile yet, but the closest she had come since being abandoned. Later that day, he showed her how to track small animals in the ruins. At first, she mocked the idea, muttering angrily in her tongue, waving her hand as if saying it was useless. But when he crouched and pointed at the faint marks in the dust, she followed, her curiosity too strong to resist. Her steps grew cautious, her eyes scanning, and when she spotted movement before he did, her chest swelled with pride. She tapped his shoulder, pointing ahead, her silver eyes wide with triumph. The human looked at her, his expression calm. Then he whispered the word he had given her so many times. Strong. This time she did not shake her head. She repeated it softly. Strong. The word no longer felt foreign, no longer burned like a lie. It felt like hers. That night by the fire, she sat closer than before, her knees almost brushing his armor. Her hands moved restlessly, and then she spoke, her words broken, halting, but in his language. You teach me. The human looked at her with surprise, then nodded, his voice calm. Yes, I teach. She repeated the words again, her lips awkward, but her eyes bright with determination. From that day forward, she tried harder to speak. Her voice was clumsy, her accent sharp, but each word carried strength. She laughed once when she mispronounced something, and the sound startled even her. It was light, quick, a spark of joy she had never allowed herself before. The human did not laugh at her mistake, but the corner of his lips curved faintly. Every lesson became more than training, it became discovery. She learned how to hold a blade without fear, how to move across stone without stumbling, how to build a shelter with her own hands. But more than that, she learned how to speak, how to look into his eyes without lowering her head. Each word she practiced, each smile she allowed, was like a stone added to a foundation, building something she never thought possible. One evening, as the fire burned low, she looked at him and spoke, her voice trembling but clear. Not broken. The words hung in the air, heavy and powerful. The human looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, his voice firm. No, not broken. Her eyes glistened, her chest rising with emotion she could not hide. The girl lay awake long after he closed his eyes, staring at the stars through the cracks in the roof. She remembered her father's voice calling her useless, her siblings sneering, her mother turning away, for so long. Those voices had been chains around her heart, but now another voice echoed louder, calmer, stronger, the human's voice telling her she was not broken, but strong. The next morning, she woke before him, gripping the staff tightly in her hands. She stepped into the ruins, the cold air biting at her skin, but her body moved with determination. She practiced the stances he had taught her, her strikes sharp and deliberate, her movements no longer clumsy. When the human stepped outside, he watched silently as she trained without command, without waiting for him. For the first time, she was not following, she was leading herself. When she saw him watching, she did not stop. She struck harder, faster, finishing with the staff raised firmly in her hands. Her chest heaved, her eyes burned with fire, and her voice rang out, proud and unshaken, strong. The word no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. She had spoken her truth, claimed it with her own voice. The human nodded slowly, his expression calm, but in his eyes shone quiet. Pride. The girl lowered her staff, her lips curving into a small, certain smile. For the first time in her life, her voice was not drowned in shame. It was rising, and she knew it would never be silenced again.